The United States and our allies are authorized to use force in ridding Iraq of weapons of mass destruction.
Behind the growing build-up to war, there's also a growing anti-war movement.
We're ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas.
Okay, welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries. I'm Dave Lizabram, here with my co-host,
Andrew Keats.
And let's see. We are joined by a very special guest, Dylan Rupert, former producer Dylan of Bandsplain. For people who like music and podcasts, that's maybe why you have stumbled upon this show. And freelance writer, Substacker, person of varied interests. And Dylan, welcome to Rock Docs.
Thank you, guys. What a cool podcast. I love Rock Docs and I love podcasts. So what are the odds, you know?
Just all the stars lined up. So we're happy to have you on. And we typically invite our guests to select a film to discuss. And the movie you've chosen is the very first word of the name of this movie is a subject of conversation. But the movie, at least at the time, was called Dixie Chicks, Shut Up and Sing, from 2006, directed by Barbara Kopple and Cecilia Peck. Now, interestingly enough, Barbara Kopple is also the director of Harlan County, USA, one of the greatest documentaries, or really films, of all time. So props just straight off the top for that. And
simply must agree.
Yeah. If you want to disagree about that, now's your chance.
Yeah, now's the time to get out. I'll do my little interjection here where I hadn't seen that movie, although, you know, it's kind of one of those ones that's on all of the like best documentary of all time lists, you know, so you kind of know about it. And I don't know if either of you have been to Dollywood, if that's something in your tourism repertoire or not. I took my best friend for her bachelorette party, and we were on the coal mining themed ride. And I was like, oh my God, this is making me feel like I should watch Harlan County. And we're in line ready to go on this ride. That's basically like, you know, it's this film about like tragedy in the workplace, severe poverty, and you know, violent treatment of workers, made into an amusement park ride, which it's the best ride at Dollywood. It's so fun. But anyway, that's what got me to finally watch the movie. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the best movie. One of the best documentaries I've ever seen.
It's funny. There's something very Dolly Parton about that, about turning something so tragic into a theme park ride.
Yeah.
It's very
into something beautiful. You could say
something beautiful. Yeah.
It is really the American project. Is turning horror into entertainment for you know,
capitalist horror into entertainment. Exactly.
Yeah, and that really does tie into the some of the themes of the film, I would say.
It does. It really does. I mean that sincerely.
Yeah, no. In fact, now that you say it, you can see the interest of the filmmaker.
Yeah, it ties together. So let's do our little round the horn about for the purpose of this conversation, for this moment, we'll say the Dixie Chicks so people know who we're talking about. Andy, give us your relationship to the band formerly known as the Dixie Chicks.
I was in high school and early college when they were just absolutely massive. I mean, just like so huge. Much more huge than the bands that were considered huge of the time, you know, like considerably bigger than any band that you might have been into at the time, basically. I think my biggest memory is the subject of this film is what was happening when I was in college, and over sort of all of the echoes that were happening to the band that were also just happening in this country at the time. And then I kind of just didn't think about the Chicks for I don't know, a decade, like a very long time. I know they still had a career by all accounts. I just just didn't occur to me for a very long time until, I don't know, the mid 2010s or something. When they had that comeback tour, and it was like massive. And I remember my wife and some of her friends went a bunch of times, and then I saw them last year for the first time at Austin City Limits, and they put on one hell of a show. So I would say that I have a fairly limited relationship with them, except insofar as no one can really have that limited of a relationship with a band that was this huge, that you like a limited relationship means I know like 15 songs as opposed to 40, like.
I'm going to kind of stop you right there.
Yeah.
Though, because I feel like I had less of a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Because
it's possible that's our age difference.
Yes.
That, like when I was 18 when they were huge, and like, at least growing up where I grew up, hanging out with the kids I hung out, it was like, even if it wasn't your thing, you were going to be encountering it a lot, like all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they really transcended. I mean, they were a huge crossover. And so I think no matter if you were of the regional country markets where you would be aware, like that was my experience, like younger, growing up in Seattle, where country music is this niche thing that no one I knew listened to, but somehow Dixie Chicks were in everyone's consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like in my 20s living in LA.
Yeah, I guess if there was going to be a place where you weren't going to be aware, that might be it.
I mean, late college into past college. So, I had friends in college from like all over the place, and certainly friends that listened to country music because, primarily because they came from places where that was more popular than where I did. But like, I was past the age where I was like, just like hanging out, watching MTV. It was, you know what I mean? Like it was so like, I feel like before this movie, like if you had pointed to me and said, name 3, if you had done the reverse and said, oh, you like the Dixie Chicks, name 3 songs. I'm not 100%. I think I probably could have pulled off Goodbye Earl and Wide Open Spaces, and maybe would have failed the Bechdel Dixie Chicks test because I just kind of missed it. And like those 2 songs I was aware of, and thought they were fine. Like I didn't not like it. It just wasn't my genre. I was listening to indie rock and hip hop and stuff, and like and I feel like it was, I don't know. So but I knew about this whole event, of course, that there's the subject of the film and all these other things, and never had anything against them or anything like that. It was just like it kind of missed me, so it was an interesting kind of thing to revisit. So Dylan, it sounds like you were kind of had a little bit more exposure to them, or how did you come
honestly, I would argue I maybe had the least of the 3 of us. I think just from pop culture and being like a total MTV2 on constantly type kid, and just very aware of radio and everything. Like I knew they existed, and I remember my dad had a couple of their CDs just because he tends to keep up with sort of the left of center country milieu, but by no means was I listening to them on my own, except for their cover of Landslide.
Yeah.
Which for some reason just absolutely, the stronghold that cover had on my 7th grade class. Wait, no, it was more like middle school. It was 6th or 7th grade. And I did this thing called Ski Bus, which I've compared notes. I think people in other regions that are close to ski mountain slopes or whatever have this. It's not just a Seattle thing, but you can sign up for an after school on Friday. They shuttle you and your classmates up to the mountain, and you go skiing or snowboarding or whatever, and you get cheap season passes because it's nighttime. And it's the alternative of like going to the mall or whatever. Is absolutely badass. Best time in my life, peaked. And I have these core memories of a bus full of like 6th, 7th graders coming down the mountain at like 11 p.m., like belting Landslide. It took me until college to know that was a Fleetwood Mac song. So that was my extent. And then I just like, so that kind of dates me right to this time where like 2003, this whole scandal, with Natalie Maines' comment about George Bush and being ashamed that he's from Texas and whatever. That sort of just seeped into my consciousness through osmosis, because I'm 11, 12 at the time. I like have very distinct childhood memories of watching like Mission Accomplished on the TV and the news, but not quite knowing how to place what's happening with what I'm learning at school or my, sixth grade understanding of U.S. history up until that point. So watching this movie and encountering this like later in life as an adult has been really interesting, because it's sort of recontextualizing these hazy core memories I have about pop culture, politics, and like how they intertwine.
Yeah, and I think that's like sort of pretty common, right? When you're like your like earliest political memories, where you're sort of aware of what's happening, but maybe not how it all fits together, or even like that interested in having an opinion on it. Like or like you're like content to have like half of an opinion on it or something like that.
You just pick the parent you like better and then say whatever their political opinion is. That was always my MO.
Yeah. All right, so we've established we've got 3 hardcore longtime Dixie Chicks stands here.
Right.
Here to talk about this this film.
I will say, when I like saw them last year, and I was like pretty excited. I thought it was going to be cool. And it was a festival set, and like they had been playing for an hour before I didn't know the words to a song. Like like it was like a Tom Petty type experience where you're just like where you're like, even if you don't know the music, you know the music.
Right. And that's such a good movie. Yeah. No, that was like kind of my experience in the movie. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. I know that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that is such a good comparison. I just was rewatching it ahead of this and writing down just like my passing thoughts. And I love that scene where Natalie is negotiating with her manager about TV appearances. And it's like the first time, I think, sort of like the fly on the wall, the camera's broken in the film. And she's like, why can't we be the Bruce Springsteen or the Bob Dylans? And then she like looks at the camera and sort of apologizes. She's like, not that we're as good as that,
Yeah.
But like, in terms of canonical impact, you could certainly make that argument. But I think the Tom Petty argument is actually, for some reason, just the tone, the ubiquity, the all-Americanness of a certain kind of genre, the way I could see them doing this until they're 70. I don't know if they're intending on touring that long, or could get as big of a, arena tour going in their 60s. But that feels like it struck a chord to me.
Yeah. Well, and since you bring it up, I'll piggyback on that, because that moment really stood out to me too, because, I understand her impulse to immediately back away from that comparison. Like, why would you ever want to compare yourself to Bob Dylan, even as a metaphor or analogy or whatever? But I think what they go through here is quite Dylan-esque, particularly like 80s Christian era Bob Dylan, and the like feud that he had with his fans during that period, and his like, both sides of it becoming this like culture war thing, with him being like, I'm just saying what it is that I'm thinking a lot about right now, and fans being like, we don't want to hear that. We'd like to hear you do the thing that we came here for, which fits into a different cultural signifier set. Like, we would love you to be the like urbane signaled anti-war troubadour that we like, not the reborn Christian that you are like literally telling us we're going to go to hell at concerts that we paid for, and they are much, much, much less outspoken than that. But the sort of like battle between the fans and the band, I think, is really similar to that.
Yeah.
I think Springsteen has a little bit of that too, with like the never-ending fake controversy / fake confusion about the lyrics of Born in the USA, and the use of his music, to, paper over America's various crimes and misdemeanors. I don't think that's really, I think that like that has finally passed. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you see like the, various, our friends on the Republican debate stage the other day using, Springsteen's song. I think everybody's finally clocked in on like what he's about and what his songs are about. But there was like a good 35 years where like you just plop on a Springsteen song and assume that was going to convey, heartland American Republican values.
Yeah.
So let's kind of roll into the movie a little bit. So the movie comes out. So I mean, just kind of setting the scene here. The movie kind of takes place over, two real time periods. There's like the 2003 Iraq War controversy. We could talk about that, and then like the 2005 and 6 period when they're like kind of still dealing with the fallout from that and recording an album and touring, and it goes back and forth. And the movie comes out in like late 2006, I think. So like, it was, I get that. I didn't see it at the time. I only saw it because, I'd wanted to see it. I just never got around to it because Dylan requested it. So, I guess I should ask Andy and Dylan, like, had both of you seen the movie before? Dylan, you'd seen it in the past. Andy, had you seen it before?
No,
you
I had not.
You had
no,
not.
I was just looking through. You were like, "What movie do you want to do?" And I looked through what you had already done, and I was like, "I want to do." Oh shit, there it is. I want to do, and like rinse and repeat. And then I was like, I gotta do one that's like Dylan coded that no one else.
Yeah.
I was like, you guys got the Tom Petty and Neil Young and all that covered. Like, okay. Like, country girls, what do we got?
Yeah.
And then when I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, this is like more than just, a portrait of a musician. I appreciate this is like an interesting document of pop culture, of a certain time. And I think it's so much more than a story of them. I think it's about celebrity. It's like the whole thing that everyone says about this movie is that it's sort of like the first document of like cancel culture.
Yeah.
Which is something that I came into the movie thinking that I would probably affirm that whatever take on it. But now I'm just like, no. It's like, it's a lot more complicated than that and more interesting. I think it has a lot more to do with spectacle and celebrity. And like, I think, Andy, you're just touching on that with the very Jokerman mindset Bob Dylan comparison, where it's a lot more about like what do we expect of artists, especially there's like a uniquely American thing about this. These are all kind of still fermenting thoughts, but I hadn't seen it until this, and then I just was like, all right, hell yeah. What was I? Oh, I was like thinking about Heartworn Highways before. That's like beautiful documentary. I could talk about how beautiful it is and how it captures, some of my favorite artists who created, impacted blah, blah, blah. But this one felt like it has some meat in it, you know what I'm saying? As far as talking on Raw Docs podcast goes.
Yeah, well, it certainly is like, I guess what I was thinking about when I was watching is it's like, in some ways so set up to be the perfect movie to pull off the shelf and to frame your think piece in 2022 around what this tells us about where we've been and where we're going, and to slot in all the recent controversies into it. And like, I think somebody could do that, but like that is not honestly what I really get out of this movie much at all. Like it's in there certainly, but like if I get anything out of this movie, or particularly anything that sort of lasts and tells us something, it's like the second third of the movie when they start to get like a wind at their back, and instead of griping about how like they can't believe that this has become such a big thing and like when will it blow over, they instead get this momentum behind them about like, well, we can just play for the people who like who we are and what we have to say, and they like end up tailoring themselves towards this new crowd. And like I don't know, I think that so is like not the lesson of cancel culture for the most part, or like the way people talk about it right now, but it's in some ways like a more applicative like example of how pop culture has changed since then, where it's like, you can narrowcast to a group of people who likes what you have to say, and that group can be very large, like enough to give you a best-selling album. And you might have to change where you tour, but like it's not going to make you any less of a monumentally successful artist.
So, all right. So we've got we've got like some main characters in this film, and basically it's, well, all right. So I think one thing I'm just struggling with the last few days is like, how are we referring to this band? Because
Yeah.
famously they were the Dixie Chicks for 20 whatever years, or however long they were around, and then in 2020 or thereabouts, they chose to just rebrand as the Chicks for fairly obvious reasons. I have no complaints about that. I think that's fine. It's also not for me to say, but
Does anybody
nobody
remember that being a controversial thing like during this time period?
My recollection of the sequence of events is that Lady Antebellum had a big thing and they changed their name, and that was like a big deal. And so I might be getting this entirely wrong. So, Chicks fans out there, correct me. But I remember them to kind of come out and go, "Oh yeah, we're changing our name too. It's the Chicks." And
yes,
it kind of,
I remember that.
I just feel like it didn't stick. Like if I'm telling my wife, like what band's music documentary I am doing, I'm talking about tonight, and if I said the Chicks, she'd be like, "Who?" You know what I mean? Like I don't think she would clock that it was that. But if I said the Dixie Chicks, of course that's a known thing. Like it just didn't really take. I don't know.
It's not even hypothetical. I'm going to a festival in like a few weeks where they will be playing, and every time people ask me who's playing, I say the Chicks, and then I wait until they look at me with a confused face, and I say they used to be the Dixie Chicks. It's like it hasn't really taken. But I guess I was just wondering if like I certainly maybe wasn't spending enough time on the blogosphere in 2004, but I was wondering if any like self-satisfied conservative was like, oh, the Chicks think they're so liberal, but they've got Dixie right there in their name. Like was
Probably.
was that
yeah. I really I don't know. I'm not aware of if there were any like pointed calls or call outs or ins or throughs or whatever about the name, but I would venture to imagine that it probably was like a reaction to the time and maybe wanting to get ahead of a call out that they expected, or maybe maybe it was just the perfect time for them to feel like they could make that move in the public eye if that's something that they've been thinking about for a while. My old roommate's dog's name is Dixie. She is 14 years old, 12 years old, something like that. She's from Texas. She was just like, cute name,
Yeah. Just change it. Like, no, it's spelled Dixksy. It's Dixie.
My kid,
exactly.
My kid came home from first grade.
Named after my grandmother.
My kid came home from first grade the other day with a thing that they had made, like a craft thing, and it was a Dixie cup. And I'm like, well, they haven't come for those guys yet. The cup people are still out there doing their thing.
The cups.
Yeah.
They're now called the cups.
Yeah.
No, not to diminish that at all, but it's just like of course, especially after watching this movie in which they referred to as the Dixie Chicks, because that's what they were called at the making of the movie. It's kind of just puts you back into the reflex of using that name. But
right,
totally. It's also, I mean, like, so we're bouncing around here, but like, I don't think I ever had any idea what an old band they were. Like they were formed in 1989. It was
the two sisters,
right?
And then Natalie came later, and then that was kind of like their sort of packaging.
And then they lifted off from there. But like, man, 1989, that like, especially country radio was a different thing in 1989. But what it was by the time they had ascended to the top of it was just they saw a lot. They'd been there throughout the whole like Garth Brooks rise.
Yeah, it's sort of like the stardom you imagine them setting out to find was so different than the one that they ended up finding, or even just creating. Because I think they sort of created a new mold, or sort of iterated on the 90s explosive nature of like female crossover country music. But they really stand apart, I think, just because of their sound and who they are politically, you know, whether or not they chose to carry that mantle or not.
So, okay. So the crux of this whole thing is it's 2003. The United States is about to embark on its, you know, highly successful, beloved Iraq War II.
America's favorite war.
Yes. Yes. You know,
Dude, I love those clips with the publicist when he's like, here's why you got to backtrack. This thing is a success. Like you don't, you don't want to be against this thing any longer than you have to. It's gone so well.
About to wrap this thing right up. So anyway, so they're in England performing a show. Like the movie provides us clips of like, you know, all the, you know, Colin Powell trotting out his BS, you know, in front of Congress and all this other stuff. You know, Bush, Cheney, all of our friends, and then you know, so they're in England, and they're Natalie, the lead singer, says, you know, this is apparently just like kind of a random, unprompted comment. She says in the middle of the show, like, you know, in between songs, like, we don't want this war, this violence. We're ashamed the president of the United States is from Texas. And then the one of the more interesting parts is very briefly, but then they show like the after show, like, you know, I guess they were just filming for documentary or for general sponsored content or whatever purposes. So they have footage of them all with their manager after the show, and everybody's like, "Hey, great show, another big success." Like there was no recognition in that moment that the most defining statement of this person's life had just been said. You know, like the thing that's going to be like, you know, up there in her, you know, obituary or her Hall of Fame or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's just a thing. She's never going to make a statement that's ever going to make more of a cultural impact than that. There was no sense that had happened. It was just like the usual between songs BS and, you know, whatever. And then you know, the blowback happens and you see all the clips of, you know, Bill O'Reilly's of the world and so forth, and Pat Robertson and everybody complaining and, you know, balling them out and having just real fun with some real clever wordplay. The Dixie Twits. I mean, can you imagine the high fives that went around the room when they thought of that? I mean, what a sick burn.
Sick burn, Bill O'Reilly.
I mean, you know, so, and then, you know, and then it's just all the, you know, everything that happens after that. So, but like my kind of recollection at the time is just that, like, I mean, the thing that I first remember hearing about this band was Goodbye Earl. I feel like that was their first crossover hit. And so just letting everybody know that Andy's dog Bodhi has joined the chat. So
he's cute. My
What's
dog
up?
Dip is over there, but he's being peaceful.
Okay, we got multiple dogs in the house.
Apologies.
It's all good. Bodhi's always invited. So yeah, so Goodbye Earl comes out, and like, you know, it's a song about domestic violence and, you know, a for lack of a better term, kind of a feminist anthem. You know, clearly it was intended to be that, and it succeeded on those terms. And so, like, I feel like in the public eye that I knew about, maybe they were popular in the country radio world before that, but as far as I knew, like, you know, they were kind of known to be fairly outspoken. You know, I don't remember the sense that they were known to be like towing the line, doing whatever country radio says, you know, rah rah, whatever. Like I never had that sense about them. So when this first happened, I'm like, you know, was everybody not paying attention to these people? Like, did you not know who they were? But I guess maybe they weren't, or maybe my recollection is kind of skewed. I don't know.
Dylan, what do you think about that?
I mean, I don't have much of a recollection just because I wasn't like a fan at the time, but it's watching this sort of, I guess, not having that past context as a fan or being that aware of the country landscape as a young music fan has added to like the sociology experiment vibe of me watching this document of the time that I grew up in and one of its major pop cultural moments. Cause it's like, all I can see are just this. I just see so many tedious repetitions of country music interacting with the rest of mainstream culture, or I guess like sort of the apparatus of the country music industrial complex, interacting with the rest of mainstream culture again and again and again in the same ways. And it just replicates throughout the decades, no matter what the issues du jour happen to be, who the players are. It's like, these are the same things happening in country radio, or at least the same attitudes and sort of like the same structures of rationalization. I think there's like a lot of really good depictions in this documentary of how sort of I'm going over like a really macro meta here, but how like the conservative mind, when it maybe feels cornered by being like, well, what do you even really believe? What are you really pissed off about here? And they'll rationalize it by being like, well, if they didn't want to make a bad business move, then they should have been more savvy business people. And I feel like that's like a common move, is to kind of like put it in the business corner of things. And you kind of like, I don't know if this is how it actually played out in real life, but it's sort of how it played out in the timeline and the chronology of the film, is like as time goes on and maybe sympathy towards the Dixie Chicks grows, or sort of like more mainstream confusion, dissent about the Iraq War grows, that sort of argument seems to surface more and sort of take precedent over any claims to like anti-patriotism or anything, especially to a band. I mean, I feel like we don't need to sit here and talk about like how ironic it all is. It's like Traveling Soldier. It's like those are their other hits, and like Goodbye Earl, of course, like it's a song about murdering your husband, but like that's a rich tradition of country murder ballads. So it's like, you're completely right. There's a lot of sort of provocative material, and they're definitely women with a point of view. And it's just so interesting how the industry itself, specifically, conservative country radio, sort of cherry picks what its lines are, and then tries to like adjust it later.
Yeah. Well, and there's a certain element where like they are a powerful like gatekeeping industry. And so they are genuinely offended that they are being put in a position of having to answer for kicking someone out of the club. They're like, why did you make us have to do something?
Yeah.
That was against, you guys broke the rules. We had to do it. Like,
yeah,
all you have to do is follow our rules, and then you get to stay in the club. And it's like, and there's like 5 or 6 different interviews with different like country radio guys whose take is basically like, well, if you just had done what everyone does, then we'd keep playing your records, but you were making my life hard, Totally.
And it's big middle manager energy.
Yes, exactly. It's such middle manager energy, exactly. And like, certainly by now, but even maybe back then, like I think the ability for popular radio to have that sort of influence on other genres of music was over. It's certainly over now. I think it might have been over, but by then as well.
It's different though in country. Like it really is how the genre is organized, and it's just starting to. And like people like Marissa Moss and Natalie Maines are like much more on the track of sort of reporting this out as it happens. But even just like my friends and people I work with in Nashville, the sense is like country is about a decade behind sort of streaming being or any other sort of viral or digital way of getting music. Is sort of that's the main way the rest of the world is breaking artists and finding new artists, but it's still like country radio is sort of the engine. Now there's been a few breakthroughs where it's like the Zach Bryans of the world, like truly the Chris Stapletons and stuff have sort of like pushed that into a different direction. But we're really only starting to see the beginning of that, which is just so crazy. Right. And I think goes back to my point I was making earlier about how this feels so almost tedious to watch them go through all of these things that it just seems like never ending. Definitely have a lot of and also the things that I love. This documentary really hits a lot of my like doc wish list things. Fly on the Wall, love it. In the studio, love it. Chad Smith on drums. What is he doing there?
Yeah.
Love it. And they're having a little powwow. Oh my god, that I'm sidetracking here, but
That's great.
the scene where she's asking him, so they're just starting to sort of write their own full album for the first time. Like the previous albums, they had credits on some songs, but it was mostly, in the country and pop way. Other people are contributing. And she's sort of Natalie is getting her head around writing and credits. And she asks Chad, like, who writes the songs and how do you distribute the credits, and therefore the royalties? And he's like, it doesn't matter who writes it. We split them all evenly. And she's like, what? I can't imagine. She's like, if I was the bassist and I didn't contribute to writing the song, I wouldn't feel right taking the money. And then I forget which of the sisters, but one of them is like, well, that's how you keep the rest of the band happy. You like just start to see the tensions that just happen, like every single band. And it
was also just, that moment was so funny just because she's like, if you're just like the bass player and you didn't write the song, and I'm thinking like, the bass player of the Red Hot Chili Peppers is kind of a big deal. You picked
the wrong bass player for your sort of like diminished
what if you're the bass player for the
viewpoint?
Beatles and you're not really involved in the songs? You're just some guy playing bass. Like you pick one of the more well-known bass players who are very involved. But yeah, it was a funny moment.
Yeah, true.
And they're
there's
with
that,
Rick
and
Rubin.
there's. Oh my God. Yes. I'm living for him rubbing his belly and being like, rewrite the whole thing. Oh my God, I love every minute of it. And I love I love the studio process stuff for just all this silly shit. And then just like the profound moments where you're like, whoa, this thing that has been in my consciousness, against my will, just because it's so popular. This is like how it was made. That's so incredible. But
there's like an undercurrent through, like, so there are a bunch of these moments. They're all awesome. Also, I love her line to Rick Rubin when he's like, well, just rewrite the lyrics. And she's like, you just rewrite the lyrics. Like, what do you like? That's not like, easy for me.
Like rubbing and stroking the beard.
It's like good. But like through it all, it's like they have a real arc where they're going from like absolutely being uninterested in this like media storm that they've been thrown into and like unwitting participants in it to like, well, what's the least we can apologize for while still feeling like we stood on our morals, to like, all right, fuck it, maybe we're just liberals, like, like like maybe we're crossover artists now and it's okay that we're liberals and we'll go on these shows. And like, it's, I don't know enough about the band's history to know how much of that arc is contrived by the story, by a director wanting to tell an interesting movie. I have no idea, but it certainly comes across as very, very convincing that it's what's actually happening over the course of these 3 years or so in the movie, that they're like warming up to this place and they're fine, especially as they find a crowd that's into it. And it's just it's pretty cool, and it's so much more interesting than just like woe is me. Can you like, let's go inside what happened to these people when they accidentally said something that pissed off a lot of people on country radio,
Yeah. It is interesting. Now the movie, like the time period that the movie only goes up to 2006, which is sort of interesting because like the movie reveals it sort of suggests some interband tension in the sense that like Natalie is always much more, on the side of like, fuck it, than Marty and Emily. And we know that like Marty and Emily, they're sisters. They grew up kind of in this country music world. They're older, a little bit older than Natalie. They, they just kind of, they both live, one of them lives in Austin, one of them lives like on a farm in Mississippi or something like that. Whereas Natalie,
San Antonio.
Okay, right. Well, maybe I missed that. Okay.
Yeah.
But Natalie like pointedly lives in LA. They show her living in LA, and the other two are like, LA sucks. And also like, they're kind of both at different times. I mean, it's not like they're of one mind, but the sisters, Marty and Emily, are both like from time to time pushing for a little bit more of a conservative approach, from a career perspective. And Natalie is much more stick to her guns. And after the movie, concludes, we know what happens is that like they made this album that you see them making in 2006, 2005, 2006. It comes out in 2006. They tour, and then there is no other album by this band until 2020. And since then, there hasn't been they're still a big touring act, but their career as recording artists almost comes to an end here. And you don't really, the movie's not going to tell you, because it's not the job of the movie and it wasn't that time, like whether that was, the cause or whether it was for other reasons. And I, maybe I could have dug in and read a bunch, about them, but, you could look at this as like almost the breakup or culmination of this band. And they're, and whether they knew it or not. And since then they've been, I would say maybe kind of a legacy act. They're going to play this festival you're going to, Andy. They're going to play all their hits. Everybody's going to love it. Maybe they'll throw in a couple songs from the new album, or, maybe they're working on one or whatever. But it's kind of their run comes to a conclusion just as this movie wraps up.
I feel like, though, that the sisters and Natalie's tension, I don't think that was reactionary towards Natalie's comment. I took that more in what I actually thought was like sort of valuable watching this movie over just reading like the Wikipedia page or anywhere else you could get information about what happened. But like, I felt like their tension was sort of just the classic band tension, like the classic leader of the band who's outspoken and wants all the writing credit, and like they actually, I felt like at every turn they would maybe turn the rock over and try to look at it at sort of like a more gentle or less confrontational side, but it felt like at every turn they were with Natalie. They were never like there's that really moving part at the end where I forget Emily or Marty's the one. She's in tears being like, I would do anything for Natalie, and not out of, it didn't read to me as sort of like any sort of blind allegiance. I feel like she very authentically was saying, this was, her comment was like one of the best things that ever could have happened to us. And she doesn't get into a ton of specifics, but it's like, it kind of forced them to define who they are as individuals, as public figures, as artists, as people with values, and what they're willing to stand up for or not. Because, stakes, I think it was also a really interesting depiction of stakes, where it's really easy to say, you are the greatest greatest selling all female act of all time. What do you have to lose? You're always going to be rich and successful. Well, it's like, they show that scene where they are quelling their touring crew's anxieties about how this tour, they took this deal with AEG that was basically a bet on them selling out all these dates, and they didn't do as well as they thought they would. And Natalie's kind of viewing it as a failure. And I think one of the interesting sort of tension points in the movie is you have all this like wind behind your back watching Natalie just go like, fuck you. Like, this is, I'm like, fuck country music. We are building a new audience from scratch. We have all the support we need. We do not need to do this with radio. And then the wind kind of gets taken out of everyone's sails when this tour doesn't do as well as they expect, and they kind of fuck this deal. And it's I think just a really interesting, and in light of what you just brought up, David, where it's sort of like they hit a really hard pause after, this movie leaves you wondering like how much of the comment, how much of the tour, how much of the interband tension led to that. But I think with sort of just like, trying to narrativize real life or find a moral or a theme in someone's sort of real life career story is like, you stick to your guns and whatever happens. There's not always a happy ending. There's not always like, yes, they got a #1 record after it without country radio, which is, a big success. But I think the movie frames it as they're they're dejected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when they turned the AEG offers them this other deal which is basically like, we'll guarantee
$23
you
million.
a healthy but smaller payout for your tour. We'll take the risk, or you could take the risk. And Natalie says basically like, I see what's going to happen here, and I'm going to be kicking myself that I didn't bet on myself because I think we're going to sell a shitload of tickets. And then they don't. And like, the fact that they don't is what probably doesn't happen in the scripted version of this movie. Like
Right.
that they bet on themselves and then they're right. Then it's like, that old Natalie Maines, right again, stuck to her guns and stuck it to the industry. And it's, it's more complicated and more interesting than that. But I think, I think it is, to your point, the sort of stress of how big the thing becomes as you grow, right? Like as you grow to fit the big traveling circus required of playing stadium shows. It's like Jerry Garcia talks about all the time. Like he couldn't stop playing when he was addicted to heroin because there were dozens of people whose jobs relied on the Grateful Dead playing stadium shows. And it's like, it's sort of the same thing here where like they could have fallen further from this height and played theaters for another 12 years. And
but
like
it's like you're a business and you have to downsize and someone's got to eat the shit.
Right. Yeah. Like a small band.
There's always stakes. Yeah.
They say this is the first thing we ever did that was not a like enormous success.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is just like, holy shit.
Yeah. Imagine you're like in your 30s and like all you've ever done is just get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like,
I'd take it.
I do want to give a shout out to like the scene we've been talking around here, which is like a scene I've never seen anything like this in any music documentary. And it's must be like such a big part of musicians' lives, and you never see it, you never even hear about it, is the filmmakers are with not the band members, but the management when they are actually showing like inside Ticketmaster or wherever when the tour is going on sale. Yes. So like literally they're going like, it's like they're, directing a TV show, like, okay, go Dallas, okay, go Houston, whatever. Like you can see them like pressing the big button and like making decisions like, are we doing a second night in Charlotte, or whatever. And like, kind of rah-rahing, is this, like an election night kind of thing. Watching the numbers come in, and then you see, I mean, the filmmakers must have been like, wow, this is incredible, like that, because they didn't know what was going to happen in that moment. Nobody knew. And the fact that like you see the management like just like all admitting to themselves, like, let's not, BS ourselves. This is a failure. Like, this is not a success. These tails are soft, blah, blah. What are we going to do? Let's think about this. Let's reroute. Let's, and eventually, I mean, Simon Renshaw, the band's manager, who's like really as much of a main character in this movie, as the three women in the band are, and we could probably talk a lot about him as a character, but he basically says, I think it's his idea to kind of focus on Canada. Basically, like, sales are going well in Canada. Let's play like every single hockey arena in Canada from Moose Jaw to wherever, and build up the audience there. And he like clearly he's a guy who's just like, you got to pivot, you got to move. You know what I mean? You see where the opportunity is and you go. That's why he is in that position to be the manager of the biggest, one of the biggest artists of all time. But it's just such a compelling scene. Like, it's probably the scene from the movie that I'm going to remember the most is just watching inside that and being like, and I'm thinking like, I wish I could see 100 documentaries where you see
totally
this.
Yes.
Or however it goes. I'm like, as soon as a tour of any size goes on sale, please somebody film it and show it like wherever, because I really want to see that.
Live stream the War Room. I would venture to assume this is like Barbara Koppel's influence. Right. Is it Cecilia or Celia Peck? Anyway, but just assuming it's sort of Barbara Koppel's lens on things, thinking back to Harlan County. I didn't watch her other film, which is about the Hormel strike in the late 80s, I think. But like her, beyond, both movies just being visually interesting and compelling and having compelling individual characters, I think that she has a unique knack for painting these portraits in a context of like, I don't want to say capitalism, but I do just like that is kind of just the dominating structure of these stories, right? Like the tension behind the Dixie Chicks issue is sales, it's business longevity. It's, it's not whether or not they have some moral code that they breached or whatever. It's a business story. And thinking about Harlan County, a very straightforward, it's about labor and exploitation and standing up to the man. And then also it's about, I think some of there's a parallel where some of the most interesting parts of Harlan County to me are watching like the politics within the unions, sort of in the messiness of it. This kind of feels like a parallel to that, where you see the messiness of sort of the middle of it, not just the individuals being affected by the decisions, not just the stars and the main characters, but like what are the gears and the cogs that are turning, that are sort of forcing these people that we're following and we're now attached to and rooting for, what makes them sort of make certain decisions that they have to.
Totally. Yeah. I've always said that I think the most interesting like business journalists are leftists, not for any sort of particular like political valence that they put on their writing, but just because of the things that they find interesting about how the business world operates are like more interesting than the things that conservative people find interesting about how the business world operates. And I think that's like, I think you're right that whether she would ever say it, like the like lens of capitalism that goes over top of her films is, it's more interesting than that sounds, right? Like she is telling an interesting business story about how these decisions are made and how these structures affect people. And this scene is like where that all comes together and where you actually see it all happening in real time. And yeah, like I have imagined this conversation for different bands from the outside, like every time I'm watching like a tour announcement or, like late announced extra shows or whatever, I'm always like, is what's going on behind the scenes as interesting as I'm imagining it? So like, yeah, it's worth its weight in gold to see them. And what do they basically say? Like, let's go from Chicago to Boston with like a shitload of dates in Canada in between.
Yeah, something like that.
And then it's just so, it's just like another thing. There's a few other, like, I just keep thinking about the little unique nuggets of this film that make it unique. And one of them to me is like not just that they portray like working motherhood and women artists, especially at this level of fame, that's like, it's hard to conceive of having babies and like literal babies, infants, and having such a demanding tour schedule. The way that they depict it, not as, I mean, it's the fly on the wall, it's the move verite, whatever, but it's just like the facts of life. Like, I don't think there's any big sweeping argument or theme that they're the filmmakers are laying on top of just the reality of their lives as mothers. I think like you get three different pictures of how they're managing being a parent and being like one of the most famous musicians in the world. And so like how that relates to the business stuff is you see all this happening and then you're like, it creates this other level of empathy, even though you're far away, you're in the business land, you're watching the Ticketmaster, the AEG wigs do their little war room, like you said, like election day shit, but you're connecting the dots as like as your own individual adult who has these responsibilities. And you're like, oh my God, this is how this top line and this bottom line affects whether or not I'm going to be at my son's birthday party, like sort of thinking. And it's just so compelling to be able to see that in a, you don't see that in music documentaries about dads.
Yeah. Well,
no, it's like the
musicians who happen to be fathers, rather, you know what I mean? Yeah,
exactly. They all happen to be fathers.
Somewhere
like,
out there in this other life.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess I would say, like, pushing back a little bit. We know that this is like one of the most successful artists of all time, and specifically their success came, fortunately for them, like at the time when you could have the most financial success as a musician, in terms of selling CDs. And I know there's certain people at the top now, like Taylor Swift, who's making more money than anybody ever did. Fine. But with those very small exceptions, like, at the level of the Dixie Chicks, which is like, one tick of success below the Beatles or whatever, or Taylor Swift, like you're talking about like a phenomenal amount of CDs being sold and stuff like that. So, Natalie keeps saying through the movie, like whenever they're challenged, like, well, who cares about the money? She's very much making that point. Like, whatever, we'll take the risk and, we're going to bet on ourselves. And, who cares about radio? Who cares about selling albums? Like, and I get that. Okay. You've already had like phenomenal success. They don't really make the stakes clear in terms of like, they're betting on themselves. And if this tour is not as successful as they want it to be, like what is that? I don't know. I mean, I don't expect them to like, bring on the band's accountants and explain it, but I just can't,
do like The Big Short, where it's like somebody comes in.
Oh my god, I was thinking
and...
Big Short of music industry, that would be iconic. I was thinking about how many moments in this movie, watching like their publicist be like, the Dixie sluts for heaven's sake, or whatever she says. I'm like, this feels like a Veep episode, but music business, which would be incredible. But I guess, David, to your point.
Well, let me just wrap this up. So I was saying, like, so we recently had an episode where we had the band Sweeping Promises on it. That will have come out by the time this comes out. And Caulfield from the band, like the episode was about a documentary about polystyrene and the band X-Ray Specs, and one thing that documentary does, obviously we're talking about somebody at a much lower level of fame and financial success. One thing that movie does a little bit is like get into the financials of like, her artistry and her challenges, and so forth. And he talks about how like he wishes more documentaries would bring the receipts. And I couldn't help now thinking about that, because it's like, really, what are the stakes? You know what I mean? Like, is the stakes that you're going to have like one less mansion in Malibu, or is it actually going to have, you're not moving into a trailer, but is there, are the stakes significant enough that there's a financial impact that you're going to feel in some way? I don't know how to categorize that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would venture to say that at least when I'm sort of talking about like the stakes here, sort of in the context of their story, it's so much more than just the finances, right? It's like the longevity of their career. It's like there isn't. Yeah, their physical safety, of course. There's the scenes where they're managing death threats. I also I was like, same. We're of the same mind, me and this Natalie Maines, where she's like looking at the FBI mugshot or whatever of the guy who's made death threats, and she's like, he's kind of hot.
Yeah,
I was like, same.
And the other, like, when she says that, I expect everyone to like break out laughing, and they don't. They're like, yeah, he is hot. Yeah, he's hot. they're like very earnestly like, yeah, he's hot. Yeah, definitely would. Definitely.
Yeah, there's another quote where she's just like, it's so human, so relatable. Also, I too have fallen for people who probably would want to kill me. But there's another moment where she's like, we've already fucked ourselves. We just have an obligation to keep fucking ourselves. But I think, it's like there's how do I tie this back to Tom Petty, like from earlier? It's like I think there were conversations, this is kind of abstract and just happening to me in the moment, but like when he died, there were conversations around like, and he's obviously the canonical top 5-10 American rock and roll stars of all fucking time. And like in I think some pretty unanimously agreed upon ways, he was also sort of like a victim of the music industry and of the touring schedules, and and it's not just money, but that's a huge part of it. And we all know why he died and how, but I think like to throw, I guess, Dixie Chicks into that context, or the Chicks into this context of what the stakes are, I think it's even bigger than just sort of like your next album cycle, or the people that you employ on your crew or whatever. I think it's sort of like, how do you manage in this music business to sort of like have a lifelong career? And of course, that's so much more than money. It's like your identity. That's
it's
right.
And how to
It's
have
your
a
whole
career, how to have a career on your terms. And
Yeah.
I think that's like the petty thing is like his big fights with the industry. Were like, I think you could make the same case as like, Tom, what's really at stake here, man? Like they're going to put out Damn the Torpedoes. Like,
right.
And he's like, no. I want to put out my cut of Damn the Torpedoes with the record contract that pays us the right amount because this whole thing is about precedent. And if they screw me over, then they're going to screw over the next guy. And like, and also it's just wrong. Like they had no right to make those, to negotiate those terms on me when I was an 18-year-old kid with no record deal. Right. And then like when he does the same thing, the next album with Hard Promises, and it's like, you're not raising the price of all records based on my record. You're just not going to do it. Like, are you going to raise?
I'm not going to be the guy.
I'm not going to be the guy. Are you going to raise the price of the next of the record eventually anyway? Yeah, probably. And I like we'll lose that fight, and I don't have any say in that. But it's just not going to happen on my record, and I'll use the whatever little shred of leverage I have to make sure that doesn't happen. And I'll sleep well, like I'll like I think it's very human for those to be part of the stakes, even if you end up financially where you would have been anyway.
Right. No, I totally agree. I do feel like we've been kicking this around for about an hour and we have hardly talked about the music. There is a fair amount of music in this film.
Oh yes, it is a music documentary about a band who wrote and produced songs.
Sometimes we are such cinephiles that we forget about the music aspect of it, but that is part of the story here. So
or in this case, like Polestar, like record, like business of music dorks.
Yeah, that too. We wear a lot of hats. Yeah. Let's just kind of I'm not leading to anything other than to say there's a lot of music in the movie and they're good musicians and I don't know what like as a music film as a film that includes music, what are your kind of takes on it? Like, well, because we all saw it for the first time recently, so where do you land on that?
I was thinking about asking you guys this earlier because I was like, I wonder if you came away with any new appreciation or feelings towards their music at all. But I mean, as for me, I'm just like, God, like I think I went from, and this is more of a trend of my last couple of years of music listening on the whole, like retreading the last few decades of sort of country and country adjacent music. I don't know if it's just the film, but I'm like, it's kind of a nice experience for me having grown up on the periphery of their music. I know a lot of people that grew up with it, and so they have different connotations. But I'm just like unpacking sort of the ubiquity of it and leaving it over there and listening to the songs and being like, oh my God, they're so good. Like these are songs that are so instantly canonical. It's just the classic thing of like, you hear them and you feel like they've always been there. And I guess in my case they have been, but
yeah,
they're incredible songs. I mean, and Natalie's voice it's nuts.
Yes, it's great. She has an awesome voice. I don't know that I feel like she, as famous as they were, ever got credit as just.
That's what I don't like have the impression of that. Yeah, I just like her. I'm not a real music journalist or anything, but I like don't know how to describe what I find so impressive about her voice. But it's like, it's so her. It's so, I guess, contemporary / of the times. It's so aughts to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's also so classic country. It's just like, yeah, she really is like one of the best vocalists of modern country.
Like a little bit of soul grit in there without overdoing it. Like, like without trying to sound black or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, for lack of a better term, I mean, you could run into that.
She has she has twang without trying to like
put
it on.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's just
I,
the
I,
perfect mix. Yeah.
my sense when I was sitting down to watch it was I was just like they were so big when I was in high school and college that it was like they were Ja Rule or Eminem, like they were like
Yeah, totally.
they were just the music that was always on.
Mhm.
And that like I guess I never really took them out of that bucket. Like they were still like in that like the music I've heard 1 million times because I always had a group of girlfriends who wanted to listen to it when we were at their house and they got to control the music. And I think like I don't know. So like the last couple days I've been listening to just them around the house when it's when I would normally be listening to whatever else. And it's like really good. I like really like it. I'm really excited to see them in a couple weeks
Yeah,
here.
lucky you.
Yeah.
Is that Ohana?
What about you, David?
It is Ohana. Yes,
Okay.
it is Ohana.
Oh, Ohana Fest. Yes.
Yes. In between Eddie Vedder and the War on Drugs, I will be seeing the Chicks.
I guess I would say, first of all, it almost seems like a slam to say that they're like super talented. You know what I mean? Like that almost seems like
yeah, because it's like, why wouldn't they be?
It's
right?
like that's kind of table stakes, but they're like the movie does like reinforce like just their instrumental and vocal talents are, and their harmonizing is incredible and impeccable. Not like impeccable in this like professional way, but again, that also seems like a slam, but it's not meant to be that way. It's just like, wow, there are some people who are that good,
And also, I will just stick a pin in what you're saying to affirm what you're saying, and that country music and its stardom operates very similarly to pop music. It's almost the same sort of like production pipeline where there's a packaging of a star because they are a good performer, a good singer, and then they put writers behind them. And so that's sort of the beginning of the Dixie Chicks career, except for the fact that they also have like incredible instrumentalists
right
as part of the package. So it does, I think, mean something in this context to be like, sure. It's not like they're an indie rock band that came up and, it's like they were kind of, saying package also feels like I'm demeaning it, but I think we're just saying things that are complementary within the context.
That's the context. But I will say, and I'm now going to step gingerly, that I do feel like the album that is being made in 2005, 2006, the songs, and I know they were like just coming into their own as songwriters, and like they'd had so many reps for all these years as performers, singers, instrumentalists, harmonizers, all these other things. So you can't expect somebody to be operating at the same level necessarily in a new skill set area or something that is less familiar to them. I just feel like that material doesn't hit for me as well as their previous stuff. I mean, first of all, you see them at one point covering the Bob Dylan song Mississippi, which is like, canonically, we can all agree is the greatest song ever written by on planet Earth. So
I had you sign a contract before you came on the show. Yes. I could say this.
Yeah, nobody's going to disagree with that out there. Okay. So, that's kind of you're setting yourself a high bar there. But even like Goodbye Earl and the other, kind of, they don't do a ton of their greatest hits in this movie because that's not really the point. There's like a little bit of Goodbye Earl. I don't think Wide Open Spaces gets heard. Some of those other songs from the 90s or whatever that you would know, like they may pop up, they may not, but it's not like a greatest hits set type. You know what I mean? It's not like one of these documentaries like the Tom Petty one or whatever, where you're going to hear every song you want to hear. But I do feel like that material comes off more strong to me than the stuff that they're writing, which is all you hear about this album is songs explicitly addressing the quote, the issue. Like maybe there's other songs in the album that are just about their lives or about other things entirely.
There's that one about Lubbock when they go to Rick Rubin and he's rubbing his belly and saying rewrite it.
Right, but that's still about how they are kind of rejected by the small town that they came from. So it's still
similar.
Part of it. So I don't know. So I just don't know that, like, if I was going to go listen to them now, I don't think I would put on the 2006 album. I probably would put on the stuff from their classic run.
I totally agree. I think I was most generally just talking about reacquainting myself with their entire catalog just through the movie, but then going back and looking at this is a little tangential, but just like writing credits on their previous albums, because I was curious about how many they, got credits on before, because it was this whole thing of them writing their own songs completely for the first time, or the full album for the first time. And I mean, some of the best songs they did write, but then also some of them they didn't. Like it was Marty shared writing credits on Cowboy Take Me Away. I mean,
okay.
is that another best song?
It sounds
Just
great.
come to my house and shoot me in the face. I will fight you.
No, that song's the best.
It's good. I think we kind of kicked around a lot of the elements. I mean, there's so much to talk about in the movie. We could talk about just a couple.
Well,
actually, I'd like to take a couple moments to shout out a few other favorites that pop up.
Yes.
Lloyd Maines, Natalie's dad, who's the pedal steel player, who kind of like talks about how he, on the sly slipped the sisters a tape of Natalie, like a demo tape, and that's kind of how they got into the band. He's great. Like he only pops up once, but you want more of him. Dan Wilson from Semisonic.
Oh, sorry. I do want to talk about her dad for just a quick second. Because I was like, oh, sick, badass. Her dad's a pedal steel player. One of my good friends, her name's Nicole Lawrence. She's like an absolute legend, pedal steel legend here in LA. And I was like, did you know that the Dixie Chicks, like Natalie's dad, just plays pedal steel? And then we looked him up. He's like absolutely legendary pedal steel player. He was one of the first. Let me get this right. What was his name? Lloyd Maines?
Yeah, Lloyd Maines.
He was one of the first. Oh, yeah. Okay. So he plays on Wilco's AM, plays on Uncle Tubulo's Anodyne. He was like a member of Joe Ely's band, played with Jerry Jeff Walker, Guy Clark, Terry Allen, Jimmy Dale Gilmore. And then there was this, oh my God. Yeah. He was on Lubbock on Everything. Okay, where is the one where he was like one of the first 3 like inductees to the Pedal Steel Hall of Fame or some Musicians Hall of Fame? But okay, he was inducted into Austin City Limits Hall of Fame as one of the first 3 members.
Wow.
Damn.
Yeah. So I mean, not Nepo baby. That's not the argument I'm saying at all.
Why are you calling out Natalie Maines?
Your dad being like a session musician in Austin, being a Nepo baby. Get real.
You finally shook off the Bush thing, and now you're calling her out again. Recanceled.
Yeah, exactly. Cancel her for being a Nepo baby, even though she's like totally middle aged. But I thought that was just so interesting because it really sort of just gives a new.
It also all makes sense just seeing the way he carries himself in the one cut he takes where he like does it and they're like, holy shit, that was incredible. And he's like, all right,
No, he's like, I wasn't even trying that one.
Well, he wasn't even trying. Yeah.
So cool.
So yeah, I did want to also get back to Dan Wilson from Semisonic, who, the guy who wrote Closing Time, that's kind of, his tag, but he's like one of these guys that like went on to become a like session songwriter guy, one of these LA people. And it's another thing you don't really see in music documentaries very much. It's like the songwriter person that like hangs out in the room and helps you, you know what I mean? Like that's a big thing in country and popular music in general. And they're kind of hidden in the background. And so he pops up a lot, and you don't really get him like writing actual lines exactly, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like he's there to bounce ideas off of and encourage, and it's just like an interesting little glimpse again into how the sausage gets made.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot like the ticket sales scene,
right? But the last one we've talked about a little bit is Simon Renshaw, the manager. Again, a character that I will carry with me from this movie.
Yes. He's oh my God.
He's so charming. He
couldn't have been better casted.
Right. I love that. Yeah. I love that the Chicks manager is this British guy. There's something about it that like he has that Colonel Tom Parkery keeping the plate spinning kind of energy about him, but also not in a way of BSing. He seems to have this very caring. I don't know if paternal is the right word. Like, again, does that sound like we're putting them in the position they don't belong in or something. I'm not really sure. Like, but parental in a way relationship with them, maybe just it's.
I
it's
don't know if this
sweet.
is a good word, but it's like managerial. He's their manager,
Well,
so I guess it's appropriate. But like, he's just like he just sort of has a very like ABC way of like of handling their problems in like an unemotional way. And he's like, look, hold on, like there's some stuff we gotta handle, sure, but like let's just lay out the stuff that we got to do. And they respond to him really well, and he like takes on the fight without ever like, he seems to like relish in the fight also. He seems to like be pretty like game for it all.
Yeah, and not in like a dismissive. I think what was kind of cool to see was their different personalities. I think they're coming to a lot of the same conclusions. They have a lot of the same driving desires and priorities about their career and about what they, want to be known for and what they, publicly want their morals to be and all this stuff. It's just three really different personalities that are sort of like coming out. And of course, Natalie's coming out sort of the loudest and brashest. But it's cool to see sort of him as, I mean, he really feels like he's their partner. I don't know. That's just how he comes across in the film. I don't know about their actual working relationship, but it's like, I think it would be so easy for, this British male manager in such a contentious situation as this to be like, okay, Natalie, take a lap. Let's calm you down, because you really look back and you really hear what she's saying she's concerned about, and how she's sort of like anchored in her own confidence, and she's never like, I did the wrong thing or I regret it. She's just trying to find like the best path forward. And I feel like she's never like dismissed, even though she is being like loud and crazy. It's cool to see that.
If they ever have a fight with her on like the substance of what she said and whether she should have said it, it doesn't make it into this movie. Like, by all accounts, it seems like there's like a general like happiness that she is in the position of saying whatever it is she wants to say, whether it's political or otherwise. And there's no one who's like, sort of kindly invoking what the opponents are saying, that are like, I know, but do we have to? Like, I'm not saying you're wrong, Natalie, but do we have to do it? Like, there's none of that,
Yeah, it feels really like genuine, and it's always hard to tell how genuine the genuine is is about, this level of celebrity. But also, let's just take a moment while we're appreciating Simon to recognize the congressional hearing scene.
Where they're like, John McCain, man.
That's just great. I mean, it's just like, it's unbelievable. It's sort of, I'm so glad that made it in, because it really drives home like, this wasn't just a culture war or whatever, like this sparked a whole war. There was a literal war. Like, lest we forget, this is literally about the Iraq War. And then it becomes a congressional hearing about like whether or not is it the Clear Channel guy or whatever, like it's radio censorship. And then he's just, oh my God. Yeah. Consolidation. And it like, then he's like doing all that fucking corporate legalese where it's like, we're not a this, we're a this. And he's like,
network.
We're not a network. We're a collection of stations. Yeah.
An affiliation of independently owned stations. We all just happen to play exactly the same songs, and everything sounds exactly the same, but that's just a total coincidence.
Yeah.
That's because we all recognize the business acumen of doing it that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And he just, Simon just roasts them, and props to
badass.
Props to the late McCain. He had his ups and downs, but he seemed to be on the right side of this one. So
he was on the right side of this one.
Yes.
Yeah. I know we're going real long here, but I do want to talk. There's so much in this movie. This is a dense text.
That's why I picked it.
It's great.
I mean, coming off of huge beer goals.
All right.
One thing I want to say.
Go ahead, man.
Hold on, Dave. The one thing I want to throw in, and I'm so glad it made it in here, because having lived through 2003 and 2004 as a college kid, what really works in this movie is how much support the troops was used as a backdoor to forcing you to supporting the war. And it is such a weird little like moment that like I remember the press picked up on it, and they used to say on the morning news like, well, if you oppose the war, make sure you reiterate that you support the troops. And that like it became this thing that you just had to be willing to say at least that much. And it would just be used to like cut off at the knees any sort of opposition. And seeing that her walk back of her statement is like, well, let me make sure I just like get out there that I support the troops, is like, I don't know how much everybody else remembers how much that was sort of like the political beck and call that you had to be willing to say, no matter where you stood, that you supported the troops.
So Andy, are you going on record saying you do not support the troops?
It was just like
we are taking Rock Docs off of all streaming platforms from here on out.
I still it's been 20 years. I still don't know what it means. I still have no idea what it means.
It's truly meaningless. But it was just a way to it was like just a way to consent kind of thing.
It was just a way to manufacture consent for the war. It was just like
I am really talking out of my depth here, but I feel like the way that music, popular music, protest music, folk music, rock and roll, whatever, sort of supported the anti-Vietnam War cause kind of was, and of course there was a draft. So we're having a different conversation about the troops and sort of agency, I guess, to a certain extent. I mean, a lot of people join the army because they have no other way to go to college or whatever, or any other prospect. Or a lot of them just join because they're cops, obviously. But I think it's just like interesting to like just look at the timeline of like we're 20 years since that film was made, and then like in the Iraq War was 40 years, 30 years after the Vietnam War, and sort of just how over those chunks of time, sentiment around troops and war and whether or not like supporting the troops is like a dog whistle for war support, whether or not it's like a sort of active acknowledgement of the structures of power and how the troops, are just sort of like agents of, whatever. Mm-hmm. That's not a coherent statement, but I think where I'm going. It's like, it's just interesting to sort of see that matriculate through time and music. And just sort of like what is okay in terms of having like a mainstream sentiment pro or against a war.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Now, I mean, in terms of the movie, we've got some classic Rock Docs villains here. I mean, we've got George Bush, Dick Cheney, they're up there in the Rock Doc villain canon with, Bright Turners and so forth, Phil Spector, etc. But we also get a lot of these, person on the street of, protesters with their signs and their BS, outside the concert and burning the CDs and saying all this nonsense. And, what it made me reflect on is just like, it kind of never really occurred to me this way. Cause I'm thinking what I learned about the history of country music and I realized that this is because I came from like a rock perspective. So when you're a rock person, then you like adjacently hear about the history of country music. What you hear about and the people that are celebrated is, Loretta Lynn and the outlaw country folks and the people that like were you always hear about the people who are pushing against the country establishment. And those are the real heroes of the story. Right. But there, I guess this movie finally got into my thick skull that like, well, there also are people who like the country establishment, and that's fine with that. Like they're not, they probably also like Loretta Lynn and Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, but that's not in the context of being opposed to the mainstream. That's just kind of one of the different flavors, that you get to pick from or that, comes up. But, they're not it's not their fault that they weren't looking at Natalie Maines and thinking like, well, this is the same thing as what Loretta Lynn was doing, or something like that 20 years before. So why should I object? That's just not, just because I was fed that perspective on country music as an outsider doesn't mean it is the perspective that everybody has agreed on. And so I'm not like certainly standing up for these idiots. They can go to hell, and I hope they regret the stupid things they said and did at the time. And certainly the people that were threatening violence or anything like that, they can go to an even lower level of hell. So making that clear. But it did to kind of make me think like, well, okay, like I'm just coming at this from my point of view about this whole country world, and I'm definitely an outsider. So, but I don't know. I mean, other than that, what do you take about that? The people we see with their signs and protests and nonsense.
Well, there's that strain of things, but then to sort of respond to sort of like the outlaw and left of center and more proletariat concerns, left leaning, I guess you could say. But I don't like to get that way when we talk about, whatever the opposite of what we think of as country music, like 20th century country music, because it really is kind of its own beast. I think Dixie Chicks are such an interesting, I guess the Chicks are such an interesting like case study for how much, I guess, like rule breaking, innovating, tradition rehashing or recontextualizing that mainstream country will allow, or will support.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're huge success, and they have analogs today, I would say, in like Casey Musgraves, Zach Bryan, Tyler Childers, Sturgill Simpson. I think that's another good analog. Different styles, of course, and like level of celebrity, but country music historically loves this idea that it's constantly reinventing itself while still sticking close to its roots. But there's always, I think, just because the industry of it is quite literally very conservative. I mean, my experiences like working with teams in Nashville was definitely a culture shock, even being someone who is a fan of country music, even top 40. Like, I just love it all, and I find it very interesting. I've still been surprised at how different that world operates in the music industry than anything I've been used to. And to see sort of the Chicks as an example of like how far your authenticity can go within that form of popular music, because they do pull from these sort of left of center pools of sound, of storytelling, of identity, I guess. So, it's like there's the straightforward, how successful can a woman be in country music? There's so many rules and barriers and stuff, which is all true. But then there's like the more complex things that I think they bring up and this movie brings up, that give you, I think, a really clear look at what it is like to work in and through the Nashville system. That goes deeper and wider than those kind of typical assumptions about being a woman in country or trying to break through the mainstream truck beers bros milieu, and find like real, like country music always is obsessed, like every like 5 to 10 years it wants to find its like new authentic voice that's going to bring it back. Right. And then when it finds it, it kind of, no matter how good, like there's something Natalie brought up in the movie. She's like, we were just like kissing country music's ass. We were so good at this audience, so good at this industry. And we make one move that upsets them, it's like we never existed.
Right. Yeah. It's like they want you to be a rebel and a straight shooter and, whatever, say things, that are outside the mainstream a little bit. But you have to know the line. And if you go over that line, then all of a sudden you're ostracized, which, I don't know.
And it's so funny that like killing your husband in a song is like not the line, but like saying like the president, I don't approve of, who knows what goes through these people's heads, but...
it's funny. I really did remember that she had said more, that like in my mind, the Dixie
she said
Chicks
something worse.
and more often and more of it, like it was. I did not really recall of it being like an offhanded remark that like is pretty modest in the grand scheme of opposing a war.
Right. It's crazy. All right. We're about to, I think, cross the famous Rock Docs line of talking about a movie longer than the movie is itself, which is fine. Andy, but
that is funny.
Dylan's been so generous with her time. Before she goes, though, are there any bands or artists you want to ask her about?
Oh, David, you never let me off the hook on this one.
You're on the hook.
Yeah, I'll
You'll play along.
Dylan, do you have any thoughts about the band Fish?
Are you like trolling me? Do you know that I like famously?
He's been trolling me for
this
years.
is like a joke.
No, David forces me to ask most guests.
I like famous. Literally, oh my god. I famously hate Fish. It was like the least favorite episode that we ever did on Bandsplain. I was like, I can't. It was Fish and Primus.
I listened to that
neck
episode
and neck.
that you guys did
with
former Rock Docs guest Rob Mitchum. Yes.
Yeah, awesome guy. Honestly, a really fun episode. I'm just like, how 9 times out of 10, the more I learn about a band, the more I appreciate. Yeah. This was the 1 time out of 10 that I wish I could unlearn.
Yes.
But Godspeed to everyone who has a good time. I'm glad you found your thing. Okay. Everyone needs their
Andy,
thing.
we're all really happy for you that you found your thing.
I'm happy you found your thing. I'm not even joking. I have a gift card for a facial service to get a fancy facial. That is an old birthday present from Yasi. And the note here says, because I was just booking it. It's like been sitting at my desk for a year, but I'm finally going to book the facial. And it says, so that after the next Fish episode, you can go renew your spirit with the facial. Because I did so much.
I did also genuinely get the sense that Yasi was disgusted by Fish.
Yeah, she's absolutely disgusted. But that's, the Bandsplain charm sometimes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It was, what did I say? I was like, there's a couple funny things. There was one where I was just like, the whole aesthetic is giving like Urban Outfitters a gift aisle sale rack. And then but then on the Bandsplain Reddit, there was this whole thread that was like, Dylan doesn't like Fish or Primus. What's wrong with her? And I was like, what's wrong with me?
I when I was listening to that episode, I remember actively like watching a horror movie where you're like cheering on the person not to go down the hallway. Totally. I like knew what Rob was about to explain, and I was like, no, dude, you have to you have to withhold that. Like that information can't be shared right now.
Too vulnerable.
I know it's a lie of omission, but like you have to do it for it. Like
I do totally understand the appeal of the large group consciousness experiment, though. I think that is compelling.
Well, we're a few days after the passing of Jimmy Buffett, and it would be a lie not to acknowledge the cultural impact what he created has on that whole thing.
That's true, and that's a subculture I can get behind.
Interesting. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah. Now that okay. All right. Well, in the last one that David's not going to let me off the hook, not asking. What about Goose?
Goose?
Are you? Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Goose.
Interesting. Imagine if Fish was good. That's the entire reason Goose exists. That's their thesis statement. That's their motto.
I don't know how to put into words the feeling that only my face can convey, but it's like
it's hard to imagine.
I think you've done it audibly as well.
It's like a Is that so?
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll have you back another time.
What's the meme that's like I'm not reading all of that. I'm sorry, or I'm happy for you, though. Yeah. That's kind of...
sorry that happened. Or exactly. All right. You've been a very good sport, Dylan. Dylan has things that she's not allowed to reveal. So she's not going to plug anything, even to us. But whatever she does in the future, you should support that because it'll be great. And
thank you so much. Please help.
Thank you.
We will plug it at the time. At the right time,
Thank you so much.
we will
right
reserve a plug on this.
Yes, whatever's
austere
embargo
program.
We don't know. Maybe it's a book about fish. I don't know. Who knows? It could be.
Seems unlikely.
If I get a book deal about fish, that's SOS. I've been kidnapped.
That's the code.
Yeah, that's call 911.
Oh, okay, if we see that come across. Okay. Yeah, good movie. I think we can say good movie. Time capsule
Good movie.
of an interesting time in American culture.
Yeah, certified good movie if you don't love the band. Would you agree?
Totally. I think it does not require it does not require liking the band.
Yeah, I think it doesn't require
And also I don't think it will even work very hard at like trying to persuade you that you should like the band. It's like
Yes.
even at the end, you could be apathetic about the band and still like the band.
Yeah, I think maybe the reason why I hadn't made the time to see this movie is that I just really thought it was going to be, sponsored content, part of this like redemption comeback tour that the label or somebody had cooked up, and it was like going to be a total fluff, whatever. And it was like drafting off the success of like Fahrenheit 9/11 and these like, whatever anti-war, anti-Bush documentaries that were, all the rage at the time in the mid 2000s. And like, while I was sympathetic to that point of view, I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to see another film in that genre. And, but seeing it now, it like sits totally differently and there's a lot more to it. And, so anyway.
It's probably aged better than all of that stuff. All of that contemporary footage. Like this is probably the best document from it.
Maybe. I'm not going to go back and watch any of those movies. Yeah. So I'll just
I mean like for instance, to hold this up against the representative like 2-hour highlight of like Bill Maher's show from that time. Let me tell you which one of those has aged better. I'm willing to bet.
I love the little sidebar that they do that she's just like, fuck you, Bill Maher.
Yeah.
She's like, she's like, he's so annoying. I'm like, yes.
Yes, thank you.
So Natalie. Thank you, Natalie, once again for your service as a true American patriot.
I think we can't say any better than that. Thank you so much, Dylan. And thanks for folks for listening to Rock Docs. Rock Docs is a Treble Media podcast. Treble is a fully independent media outlet devoted to music. You can find out more at treblezine.com. If you'd like to support the community of writers and creators behind Treble, please head to patreon.com/treblezine. And thank you for listening to Rock Docs.
You support the Dixie Chicks or supporting traitors?
Move to France, Dixie Chicks.
Try not to be judgmental of the president. I'll tell you why. He's got sky-high approval. The war couldn't be going better.
The people who got it all started was a right-wing group called the Free Republic.
They should send her over to Iraq, strap her to a bomb, and just drop her over Baghdad.
They're attempting to manipulate the American media, and the American media is falling for it.
The Red Cross wouldn't take $1 million from us.
Well, you do know that George W. Bush is the honorary chairman.
The radio station set up these garbage cans for people to throw out their CDs.
They had the hottest song in the country, and it died.
All these radio stations, they won't play them. We call and ask, and they won't.
We are a confederation of 270 individual stations.
You made a decision from corporate headquarters that was binding on your DJ.
Mr. Chairman.
And just prior to that, you say that you're an independent radio station. That's a total contradiction.
Says Natalie Maines will be shot dead Sunday, July 6th.
The Viola Center is working with police to provide extra security surrounding the Dixie Chicks concert.
It's easy for people to write ugly things and hateful things, but when somebody hates you so much for what you say that they want to kill you.
USA! USA! USA!
We're a sisterhood. We go through the good, the bad, and the ugly all together.
From the two-time Academy Award-winning director Barbara Kopple and Cecilia Peck.
Freedom of speech is fine, but my God, you don't do it in mass publicly.
Shut Up and Sing.
They shouldn't have their feelings hurt just because some people don't want to buy their records.
They shouldn't have their feelings hurt. What a dumb...